Greg, appreciate your time as always. Firstly, on this political interference by someone with links to a foreign government, is it likely we are talking about China here?
It's extremely likely. As was observed, there's probably only Russia and China that have the means to do this, and probably only China with the actual interest. Australia is not that important to Russia. It's interesting the Director General was also at pains to say that if this results in a backlash, dividing Australian society, turning Australians against community members, that would be just as bad as foreign interference. And I take that as a reference to concerns we could see anti-Asian, anti-Chinese sentiment, and that would be very destructive. So, yes, it seems likely he's talking about China, but he for good reasons, doesn't spell that out.
And so what is the goal here? Say it is China. What sort of intel are they after? Are they trying to influence Australians' foreign policy? What do foreign governments want from would-be Australian politicians?
Well, it's all of the above. Intelligence espionage measures like this are about playing the long game. Certainly China, Russia, other players play the long game. It's not clear whether the jurisdiction in question is state or federal, but the suggestion is that there's concerns at both levels. But that long game means you do several things. You cultivate relationships with people who are on the way up or who are likely to have friends, partners, family members on the way up. In some cases, you think they're going to be sympathetic to your issues. In some cases, you think you can compromise them and basically blackmail them. And there's all sorts of data that's valuable from the point of view of this foreign interference. But basically, they're after everything, whether it's trade, industrial technology, links to government. But the ability to sway things in their favour is the way they're calculating it, but playing the long game.
So, Greg, does the recent AUKUS agreement make Australia a bigger target for espionage?
I think it just, if we were talking about Beijing, and let's assume that that's the case, because that would be relevant to Beijing, but not to Moscow. Yes, it would confirm fears. If we are talking about China, if this is the country in concern, I think they'd be well advised to work on building their smart power and their soft power, and be more self-confident rather than feel that they've got to constantly be fighting enemies. But there is that insecurity in Beijing in the current Chinese Communist Party regime under Xi Jinping. And when they see AUKUS come up, they say, well, Australia is aligning now with Britain and America in the Indo-Pacific area, and that just further confirms. And they see the Quad with Japan and India, and they say, well, Australia is really putting itself on the front line. And of course, geographically, that's a position we're in anyway. So it's not a game changer. It just sort of reinforces the sense of paranoia, is my take on it.
And when you look at counter-terrorism, we heard that warning from Mike Burgess that children are increasingly becoming involved. Why are we seeing that shift?
Well, we've heard a familiar reference. We've heard it last year and the year before with the threat assessment and going back, indeed, for some years now. But during this COVID-19 pandemic period, people are spending more time at home. They're feeling more anxious. The online environment is a bigger part of their life. And the anxiety means that they're perhaps following up leads, going down rabbit holes that they wouldn't ordinarily do. And the suggestion is that there's a lot of mixed motives. People often end up talking to people that they never would have talked to in different circumstances. And that can include far-right extremists, but also there's the whole sort of conspiracy theory stuff, the QAnon stuff, the anxiety, not trusting government. That can lead them to a bad place just by their own adventure, or they can be open to being manipulated in the way of foreign interference by somebody who's trying to recruit and trying to groom a relationship. And unfortunately, we've heard for some years now, but this is confirmed in this address last night for this year's threat assessment from ASIO, that children as young as 13 are popping up on a frequent basis. And that's a real concern because children are particularly vulnerable. They more than adults lack executive judgment. They can do things rashly and they can be exploited in the most horrible way. And we're seeing all those things apparently.
And when you talk about mixed motives, Greg, I last interviewed you during Melbourne's anti-vax protesters late last year. We have recently obviously seen the protests taking that cause to Canberra. Is it clear what groups are behind those protests and whether they are being infiltrated by groups that may have ulterior motives?
Yeah, it's really hard to answer that question with any definitive certainty, Ash. But looking at what's happening in Ottawa, we're seeing evidence in Ottawa that American interests going into Canada and trying to exploit things there, and that's echoing in protest convoys, whether it's in Melbourne or at the moment in Canberra. I think it's fair to assume that most people get caught up in this don't have any sophisticated ideological position. They're certainly not. Most of them are drawn to the far right. But there are other actors seeking to exploit the chaos and the vulnerabilities and to cause trouble. And of course, the biggest concern is that somebody of their own volition would do something, or somebody will manipulate them to doing something as a lone actor, whether it's driving a heavy vehicle through a crowd or picking up a firearm. That's always the concern. So violence is a real possibility. And it doesn't mean that most people who are out there protesting understand that or have that intention.
Greg Barton, we always appreciate you joining us with your insights. Thank you.